When the church first opened, and probably on into the mid 1920s, most of the buildings on Dearborn State, Astor Street, and Lakeshore Drive, and other streets in the vicinity were single-family houses and not apartments. We did draw some people from the areas to the west of the church, but for the early part of its history, much of it, St. Chrysostom's was known as one of the society parishes, which was not altogether accurate. But what this meant was that you got a lot of coverage of bazaars and women's activities, and every year at Easter there were the newspapers would have photos and lists of people from society who had attended services at the various churches. And a story I heard from two different sources was of the couple who came up the stairs to the entrance to the church, were photographed by a newspaper photographer, and the doors were open and two ushers were standing there ready to give them leaflets and to seat them. And as soon as the photographer had gone away so they wouldn't be seen, they went down the steps and went away and didn't come to church at all. I have just for fun, when I was working on the history, I checked out the names of some of the people listed in parish references to activities in the 1890s and 1900s, and a good number of them, especially young people, lived in this area west of the church, and probably almost certainly came from middle or lower middle class families. Snively stepped down as rector of St. Chrysostom's in 1907, and a Tribune story notes that he made a remark at the service when he announced his resignation on the number of his people from the congregation who were moving to the suburbs, and complained that parishioners preferred automobiling, golf, and Sunday house parties to church attendance. In 1912, the parish archives have a copy of a flyer that was apparently distributed in the neighborhood encouraging attendance at the evening service. How do you spend Sunday evening? Come to the People's Church, St. Chrysostom's, 1424 Dearborn Avenue between Schiller Street and Burton Place. Join in the stirring music. Hear the great boy soloist, Master Eldon Day. The sermons are illustrated with colored stereopticon pictures, popular hymns, a people's service, 7:30 p.m. Start the week right. There was an Italian Episcopal mission in Chicago in the 19-teens, in the area that later became known as Cabrini Green. And for a brief time in 1911 and 1912, St. Chrysostom's was responsible for this St. John's Italian mission. It was intended not to take practicing RCs from their church, but for people lapsed from the faith. At first, they read morning prayer there, and the St. John's people came for communion to St. Chrysostom's, but a few months later, the Reverend Joseph Anastasi joined the parish, and he was Italian and celebrated the Eucharist in Italian there. In 1912, however, this was taken over by the diocese, and Father Anastasi continued his work under their auspices. I checked out again the information on the members of the 1913 St. Chrysostom's confirmation class. They seem mostly to have been teenagers, and 3 were young women who were already employed as clerks as telephone operators. Parents of others in the class included a banker, insurance company official, bookbinder, milkman, woman renting furnished rooms on State Street, and the woman proprietor of a hotel on Astor Street. 1928, the parish began its endowment fund, and the announcement read that the imperative need of endowments in a city parish is the outgrowth of conditions which have brought us huge hotels and apartments instead of houses. The clientele of a city parish is far less dependable now than 10 years ago. We must ensure the future by adequate provision against adverse neighborhood conditions. The support of those who dwell in apartments and hotels is always less than those who own their own homes, and the householder is rapidly vanishing. So let us build for the future and be prepared for the Chicago that is to be. This was a bit pessimistic because many young families and single persons who lived in apartments and hotels continued, and they probably gave proportionally as much of their income as the older residents did. We do note that more young families were moving to the suburbs, that St. Chrysostom's Sunday school enrollment had declined from over 300 to 178 from the 1920s to 1938. Dearborn and State Street by the late 1930s were seeing some decline as well, and many of the old houses had been converted into rooming houses. And the Plaza Hotel, which used to stand where the Latin School is now on the southeast corner of North and Clark, was originally an upscale residential hotel, but had now by this time housed mostly people on limited incomes. The 1936 Rector Dudley Stark was proposing an extension of missionary work nearby, presumably the area west of the church, and whether he included the Marshall Field Apartments in this, I can't be sure, but I do know that by the 1940s, that the church was sending 1 or 2 cars over every Sunday morning to pick up children for the Sunday school. They'd talked about having a special Sunday school in the building, but that never came off. In the 1950s, we had an assistant to Cuthbert Pratt, Donald Nixon, who was married with 3 small children, and he did not fit the traditional perception of St. Chrysostom's clergy. He was very friendly with many of the people who lived in the area to the west of the church, including a family with several small children who lived on West North Avenue, and in 1954, one of their children drowned while in the bathtub, and many of the children, there were 4 or 5 children, some were the same age as the Nixon's 3 children, so they were good friends, and the rector was away at the time this happened, and Nixon had got no clearance from the vestry about it, but he had offering plates put out in the rear of the church, and he told this story in his sermon, and he said, please, will you help as you can, because the family can't pay the funeral expenses. Cuthbert Pratt, as rector, was also very close to people who were not fit the society congregation image. He was a very good friend of Bertha Mandelko's, whom I mentioned, and a man who had come from Germany after Hitler came into power, lived on his own and had major surgery and couldn't clean his own apartment, and Cuthbert Pratt came over and spent an afternoon doing the cleaning for him. 1959, we begin to see the big change because the city approved the urban renewal plans for Sandburg Village. And the land was cleared, and by the early 60s, construction was beginning. St. Chrysostom's was very anxious to reach out and minister to the new residents, and they had a special Lenten series in 1963, St. Chrysostom's and the Urban Ministry, which drew very good attendance. There were close to 70 people at each of the programs, and several of those who came had been members since early in the century. They formed a hospitality committee and had greeters in the church and coffee hour. Informational flyers were put in the pews and were mailed to new residents at Sandburg. And one man who was elected to the vestry in '63 had been chosen particularly because he was a very outgoing and friendly kind of person and would welcome people. Not everybody got the precise picture, because there was a woman on the hospitality committee, I remember, saw me in coffee hour one Sunday, and there was a man sitting on his own, and she said to me, "Is that a newcomer to the parish?" And I said, "No, so-and-so has been coming here for years." And she said, "Oh, good, then I don't have to talk to him." The assistant at the time, David Owen, made a lot of calls, 200 visits in a 4-week period, according to the records, and they had semi-annual inquirers classes scheduled. Either you were confirmed when the bishop made his annual visitation, or at a service at the cathedral in December. An example of community outreach, but also showing some change in the neighborhood, was that the parish began to open its doors to AA and other 12-step groups in the early 1960s, and in the late 60s offered its space for use as a polling place. And this continued until relatively recently, when parish activities meant that space was no longer available. The possibility of decline at in the neighborhood around Dearborn and State Street led to the establishment of the North Dearborn Association in 1954, and very soon after that the group began the annual Dearborn Garden Walk, which St. Chrysostom's has participated in each year that it has they've had it, and the church is open for tours. And For many years, they had a lot of refreshments served, and the parish would have a refreshment stand. And Bob Howell was usually away, but one year he was back in town and said what he wanted was for someone to make him a little booth like Lucy has in Peanuts with a sign that says psychiatric help 5 cents. And they did that, and he sat in the booth outside the church, and there was a little sign below, psychiatric help, that said, "Lucy's not here, can Bob help?" And several people stopped to talk to him, and he got a picture in the paper. Apparently, several people who would not otherwise have felt they wanted to talk to him were able to have conversations with him, and he felt that he had done some good. And though we no longer have the big, they no longer do all the refreshments and the special events, they still have the gardens open, and we are still open 2 hours in the afternoon and get a lot of visitors. The society parish issue had pretty much died down, and has pretty much now, but was briefly revived in a January 1995 letter to the Tribune, which primarily was attacking the Reverend Andrew Greeley as a Roman Catholic priest, and didn't think he was good, would fit in with the church. I suspect that Father Greeley would be happier if he changed collars and signed on with the Episcopalians. Their only requirements for entrance to heaven are to be found in Burke's Peerage or the Almanac de Gotha, attend services at St. Chrysostom's on Easter Sunday, and then stroll down South Dearborn Street to have the event recorded by the Society page photographers. Bob Howell wrote back a few days later, "I have been the rector of St. Chrysostom's Church for 18 years. I know the good people of this parish and the Episcopal Church, and they are not described by the dismal stereotype quoted. The majority of St. Chrysostom's members are young professionals who are hardworking, dedicated Christians. The congregation includes some who are poor and a handful who are rich. We are not perfect, but we are concerned, engaged, and committed to Christ and the world he loves so much." And a professor at Loyola wrote, "This Roman Catholic rejoices to read that his Episcopalian brothers and sisters understand our own church rejection of such unjust and uncharitable diatribes." From the time the 30s, it's mentioned a little, but it certainly continued quite a bit after World War II in the baby boom generation, and you had couples with young families moving to the suburbs. The young adults group, the Seabury Forum, which was at St. Chrysostom's from the 1959 to about 1963, ended up dissolving, partly a victim of its own success, because many of the single members of the group married each other and decided they did not want to live in the city but the suburbs. And this was, I think, in part because of the school situation. St. Chrysostom's did better on keeping young families than many congregations did at the time. I know that when I was in Sunday school at St. Chrysostom's, there were children in Sunday school whose parents were members at St. James, which did not have a Sunday school, and so the parents had to send them to our Sunday school. Fortunately, the situation has changed. Partly, I think two career couples often are not so anxious to go to the suburbs and have to make daily commute back and forth, and partly because the school situation has greatly improved. The 1967 there was some delay in Bob Howell accepting the call to St. Chrysostom's. And the rumor, which I don't know if it was true, but it's interesting that it was even existed, was that he didn't want to accept until he knew his two sons would get into Latin. Now, big change by 2013 when Wes Smedley came to Chicago, and his three daughters have been attending Ogden, which I think is an excellent thing. And that, there we have it for the neighborhood.